Hey BookTube, it's Angie. So I've got my new camera now. I think I have adjusted it enough, or, tweaked with it enough that hopefully the settings are going to work. I'm still playing around with lighting. I don't have a light box, but I'm kind of doing like a makeshift thing over here. But the light I'm using is kind of flashing at me, so you may see some reflection on my face, but I'm trying different things to see if I can get a better look for you guys. So it may just look like I'm strobe lighting or something. I don't know. Hope you guys aren't epileptic or anything. So today I thought I would talk about vintage book. I know there are a lot of people, I know I'm one of them, but a lot of people that are into vintage fashion, vintage eras, cars. You just feel like you're born in the wrong generation. And so these are just a few books I've read recently that are for you. They're geared for you. I thought I would start with Going Vintage. Let's see if I can do this without the glare. Oh no, there's a glare. Okay. Going Vintage by Lindsey Leavitt. This is a YA novel about a girl who she's going through kind of a tough time in school. She starts out thinking she has the perfect boyfriend and then finds out that her perfect boyfriend is actually seeing somebody else through a virtual reality community. So she gets all upset, understandably, dumps him, and then, goes through the typical girl thing of, why can't I find a good guy? Even though she's like all of 16, but I did it too when I was 16. I did it again when I was 24, 25. Thankfully figured it out not too long after that. At the same time, her grandmother decides that she wants to move to a retirement community. So this girl, what was her name, Mallory, and her dad and her brother and everybody go over to grandma's house, pack up all their stuff to get ready to move her to her retirement community where she wants to live now. And in the process, Mallory comes across this notebook entry that her grandmother had written when her grandmother was a teenager. And it was a list of things she wanted to accomplish her sophomore year, I want to say. I think it was her sophomore year of high school. Mallory looks at this list and it's stuff like get on pep club squad, sew my own homecoming dress, get a date. There was something else, but Mallory looks at it and says, this is all really innocent. Her life sounded so simple. And then Mallory gets the idea, hey, I'm gonna get rid of all technology for a while and I'm going to live by 1962 standards. I'm only gonna listen to vinyl records. I'm only gonna use rotary phones, and I'm going to try to do all these things Grandma put on her list to see if my life gets any better by doing things the old-fashioned way. See if people treat me better, see if guys respond to me better, all of that. And in the process, she learns that there's no one generation that had it perfect. She keeps trying to talk to her grandma about this list that, her grandma doesn't remember what the hell she wrote when she was 16, but every time Mallory brings it up, there's something about that time period that her grandma doesn't really want to talk about. And it turns out grandma's got her own secrets about that period in her life. And it sort of clues Mallory in that, nobody has the right answers. It's just figuring out what works for you and just sort of making the best out of any situation, the best you can with the skills you have. And the book talks about, it's okay to have an appreciation for the way things were, but at the same time, you gotta live in the time you're in, and you have to appreciate that and find the good in the situation you're in now and not be completely in the past. So I think there's a lot of good messages here for young readers, and it's just a really funny, quick, cute read. Of course, there's a little bit of an innocent romance in there for Mallory. It's just got everything you want for a nice, quick, cute, fluffy read. And it talks about vintage clothes and going back to the 60s and the so-called innocent days of sock hops and soda jerks and all that kind of thing. So it's really cute. Then the next one I got into was Astor Place Vintage. Sorry about the glare. I'm still trying to figure out the best angle on these things. This is by Stephanie Lehmann. This has to do with a woman who buys and sells vintage clothes, owns her own shop, and she goes to this one woman's house who has this trunk full of like turn of the century, early 1900s clothes, and there's one item in particular that has, I think it's like a, what do you call those things, like a hand muff thing, and inside the lining of the hand muff is a diary from this woman that lived at the turn of the century, and it talks about all the things this woman went through. Amanda, the girl in modern times, she gets caught up in this diary of this woman from the turn of the century, and the story is kind of interesting because it sort of shows, I don't know if it was meant to be kind of a feminist geared book, but it kind of felt that way, because it starts out, the historical part of the story, when they're talking about the early 1900s, what's her name? Olive, the girl who wrote the diary. She has this very focused goal of being an independent woman, which is almost unheard of in her period. She's expected to marry or, you know, work in a shop or something like that, and Olive is very determined about what she wants to do with her life. She knows she wants to be a merchandise buyer for this big department store, which they said, you know, it's almost unheard of for a woman to get that job, and if she does, she has to know the right people and be from the right circumstances. And they try to tell her, you know, you're lucky if you get a counter job and you should be happy with that, and Olive's like, no, that I know what I want, and I'm gonna keep barreling through all of these obstacles until I have the job I want. I'm independent, I make my own money. You know, she's very like, this is even before the suffragette movement really caught on. She was sort of in the first little inklings of that time period where women were first starting to get steam behind, hey, we should have a say in things. It's funny to compare the stories of Olive, the life story of Olive, who was so determined to live by her own standards and her own set of rules without some man telling her this is the kind of job you're supposed to have, or this is the kind of you know, married life you're supposed to have, or any of that. She's fighting that. Meanwhile, in modern times, Amanda's boo-hooing over the fact that she can't get her married lover to commit to her. Like, the whole book, that just drove me crazy. I liked Olive's story in this book. Amanda's story drove me bananas, with constantly talking about, why won't he leave his wife? It's like, because they don't. They don't. But it's just, that got to be her whole story, is, why can't I get this man to work for me? It's like, just go find one that's unattached. There's millions of them out there. So, yeah, this one's, it's fun in that I liked I liked Amanda talking about like the old clothes and how that part of the story sort of transitions into Olive's story and what Olive goes through with her little circle of friends that she gets to know. I would say mainly read this for Olive's story. Amanda was, she's one of those characters I could, you know, take or leave. But still a good time. And then if you are really into vintage fashion, I would highly recommend picking up A Vintage Affair, because this mainly takes place pretty much just in a vintage dress shop. This storyline is kind of similar to Astor Place Vintage in that this has to do with Phoebe, I believe her name was. She works in London, and she starts out having this really kick-ass job working for Sotheby's, the auction house in London, being paid really well, and everything's going great, except it's not entirely what she wanted to do with her life. So she decides to walk away from this really nice paying job and kind of risk it all to open up her own vintage dress shop and see what happens. You know, her family is like, I don't know, you're so financially stable right now, do you want to do that? But sometimes you gotta go for it. I've had moments myself in my life where I was like, you know what, screw it, I'm gonna risk it. And sometimes it pays off and sometimes it doesn't. For her, it turns out alright. She's gotta work for it though, as we usually do. Kind of like in Astor Place Vintage, Phoebe's life sort of has a important turning point when she goes to meet this woman who has a lot of vintage clothes she wants to get rid of all of a sudden, except while Astor Place Vintage had to do with the early 1900s, this has to do with a woman whose story goes back to World War II era. At first the woman's like, yeah, I pretty much want to get rid of it all, see what you can get from it. And then there's one, what looks like a child's coat in the closet. Phoebe starts to pull the coat and Teresa was like, not that one, that one stays. That one has a story behind it and I'm not ready to let it go. And at first Phoebe asks her, well, what's the story behind it? And she said, I've never told anybody in my life, not even my husband. But then she decides, well, you know, pretty much everybody in my life is gone now. I need to tell this story to somebody before I die. So she sits down and starts telling Phoebe, because kind of like she's there, I guess. And something about Phoebe makes her feel like there's a kindred spirit there. So she asked Phoebe to hear her out and hear her story, and she tells the story of how she tells why she's attached to this coat, and about a girl that she was friends with when she was a child, and it turned out the girl was hiding the fact that she was Jewish during World War II, and ended up, the girl and all her family ended up getting rounded up into the Jewish trains. And so there's a really sad story there. I don't want to get into it too much because I don't want to spoil the story as far as the details. Yeah, I started to consider this kind of like a fluffy read at first, because a lot of the story does take place in Phoebe's shop and how she interacts with different customers that come in and their stories and all of that. And it's sort of lighthearted through a lot of that until she meets Teresa, and then Teresa has a very sad, impactful story, and then Phoebe has her own sad story that she's trying to heal from with the death of her best friend, and there's parallels between those two stories. So because of those, there are moments that it's kind of a little bit heartbreaking what they start talking about. So it's not an totally light read, but it is really geared around these dresses. And one thing I really liked about this story is it gets into why we get attached to the things we do. Why do we get obsessed with certain styles of clothes and certain periods of clothes, and why are we so enamored with different time periods? And it looks at that sort of thing. And it also talks about how having the right outfit can make us feel empowered and give us the strength to get through things that we might not otherwise feel like we're strong enough to do. Like, one of my favorite scenes was this girl who had come into the store initially looking for a dress for a party her boyfriend was going to take her to. And she finds this, what they call a cupcake dress, which I think is like the ball gowns that have the really poofy tulle kind of bottom, I think. And this girl tries on this dress, fits her perfectly, has this beautiful, I think it's green color on her, and she just falls in love with this dress and says, oh, I feel like a fairy, I feel like, you know, a woodland princess, and she's swooning at the way she looks, and it's a perfect fit, and her boyfriend's just looking at her going, yeah, okay, it's a bit much, don't you think? And he's just knocking her when she's just glowing in this dress, and he's like, no, it's not right, you just need like a simple black dress, because I got important people I gotta impress here. And he's kind of a dick through the whole thing, and not really acknowledging her feeling pretty. And so he ends up getting her some boring black dress, and he's like, if you like that one, you pay for it yourself, I'm getting you this one. And she goes along with it at first, but she ends up coming back later and saying, I can't get that dress out of my head, I came up with the money, let me buy this dress. And she ends up buying the dress, and the dress gives her so much confidence and makes her feel so sexy that she feels like this superwoman. She goes out and dumps her boyfriend, and not only dumps him, but decides she's also going, because it turns out she was also his secretary at work, she decides she's going to reveal all these shady business dealings he had his fingers in, just to put icing on the cake. And I just thought that was such an awesome idea, that just a simple dress on the right person, just feeling good about yourself, can give you enough of an energy boost to go out and change your life just from an outfit. I just thought that was really cool that she brought that to light, because you know, it happens. I don't know how aware guys are of it. I mean, I'm sure there are guys that know about this, but I know girls, we're very aware of the fact that you get the right bag, the right dress, the right shoes, and you know, you're either, you have the power to, you know, knock your man sideways in a good way. I'm not talking about spousal abuse or anything. I'm talking about blowing him away and reminding him what he fell in love with. Or, you know, you have the power to go get that job you thought you weren't good enough for. Or, you know, it just, like, the fact that something as simple as that could give you enough confidence to go out and go after the things that otherwise your self-deprecation takes away from you. And that's powerful stuff. So I really liked that story for working in that into the plot line, and I'm sure giving readers something to think about. The last one I was going to talk about is this cute little novella book, which I mentioned in my March favorites, I believe. And this is Glaciers by Alexis M. Smith. I believe she's a UK author. This is the UK cover. I think the American cover has like a dress made out of book pages or something like that, but I just saw this one, and this one just spoke to me more. This is just a cute little novella, just under 180 pages, so easy to read in the afternoon. They're short little chapters. It follows the story of Isabel, who works as a book restorer at her local library. She works down in the basement, fixing all the old leather and paper, torn bits and all that. And this basically just follows her for one whole day, from the time she's got to get up to go to work through the evening when she's invited to this party, and all of the things that transpire within that day, and all of the little moments that happen throughout the day that remind her of things in her past. It goes into this dream she keeps having at night. She keeps dreaming of Amsterdam, but she doesn't know why. But she is obsessed with the town and enamored with it. So it talks about, it kind of flows from her images of Amsterdam from her dreams, even though she's never been there. It talks about her love of vintage dresses, and again how just she dreams of having that perfect dress that's going to turn her life around. And it talks about her having this work crush on one of her co-workers, who is they said he was a Iraqi war vet, who is not the most open guy. She doesn't really know how to get past the friend zone with him, even though she makes it sound like they've known each other for a while, they've had a number of interactions, but whenever she wants to start talking about her feelings in that way, she's just like, no, he's gonna, no, never mind. And she backs out of it. And then later in this one day, something happens where she realizes she kind of has this now or never moment of, I have to tell him or it's not gonna happen kind of reality. But it's really cute little book. It gives you a lot to think about, and it kind of makes you think of all the little things in life that trigger nostalgia, and all the little memories, and how all these little things in a day that as a whole can seem pretty insignificant, all of a sudden you don't realize the impactfulness that these little tiny moments have when all of a sudden you're left by yourself and it's all sort of coming back to you. It also kind of makes you feel like you're going through life and feeling like a lot of it is uneventful and nothing's really happening, and then when you step back, all of a sudden you realize there's a lot of life I've been living and a lot that I need to live that I'm not living enough. So it's amazing how much Alexis Smith gives the reader to think about in so few pages, and it's done in such a quiet way. She just, like, the way she writes in general, it just reminded me of just like, I don't know, landscape painting or something, because she talks a lot about, like, this takes place in Portland, and Isabel, the character, she's actually from Alaska and she moves to Portland, and so there's a lot of descriptions about all these picturesque areas like Alaska and Portland and Amsterdam, and it's written in one of that kind of style where it's just like a snapshot of moments here and there, but it's focused on all these little things, like the way rain hits things, or the scent of a coffee shop, or, you know, the feel of a sweater or something like that. It's just all those little things where you know exactly what that smells like or exactly what that feels like, and it puts you right there. And I love books like that. So yeah, this is definitely one of my favorite reads for March, and will probably be in my favorite reads video at the end of the year, I'm sure. So I highly recommend this one. And that's what I have for vintage reads today. So check those out, see if there's something that sounds good to you, and we'll see you in the next video. Bye guys!